But first, let's talk about the damn indictment.
Yeah.
And in case any of you are thinking, wait a minute, didn't you already do a segment on the recent Trump indictment? No. We're talking about the more recent Trump indictment. We're not talking about the other Trump indictment. We're talking about the newest Trump indictment. Mm-hmm. And when the indictment comes down from Fulton County, Georgia, that will be a different indictment, which we might have to do another segment about.
But this one is, in my opinion, this one so far is like the most important Trump indictment that we've seen so far. So last week, special counsel Jack Smith released the indictment of Donald Trump from a grand jury, specifically for his alleged plot to overthrow the 2020 election.
Who, by the way, he is a holdover from the Trump administration, and he has been responsible for prosecuting several high-profile Democrats in the past. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and put the baby to rest on this is some partisan hack who just loves Democrats and is a total socialist. No, this is a Republican who has prosecuted Democrats in the past.
Yeah, and he's a special counsel because that means he gets to operate kind of insulated and independent from Biden's DOJ,
which is good.
Which is good. That's the whole goal, and it serves to avoid claims of conflict of interest and politically motivated prosecutions. That is the kind of thing and safeguard that is implemented in, proper democratic republics that respect the rule of law. So the reason I think that this is the most important indictment we've seen of Trump so far, and that it's actually the biggest deal, is that I think this indictment is potentially the most serious and the most politically important. So this directly is about his attempts to subvert the very bedrock democratic ideals and laws that safeguard our democratic republic, which is basically our right to vote, and that those votes actually decide our elections. The thing that makes us a democratic republic and not, some other form of government is exactly the thing that Donald Trump was assaulting as in response to losing the 2020 election.
But here's the thing, Michael. Any citizen has the freedom of speech to express whether or not they believe they were cheated out of an election. Mm-hmm. Any private citizen can say that the election was stolen. Any official can say that the election was stolen. They can spread that wherever they want. They can discuss it on larger platforms. And in fact, there have been many cases in which plenty of Democrats have, looked at elections and pointed to them and said, hey, that was stolen, or that was unfair, or the results are tainted. Mm-hmm. Stacey Abrams comes to mind when she made accusations in the Georgia election. Yeah. Hillary Clinton comes to mind when she questioned whether or not it was legitimate that Donald Trump won via the Electoral College and not via the popular vote. Mm-hmm. The biggest example that comes to mind is Al Gore. Mm-hmm. And all of those Democrats had the right to speak out against the election, but somehow Donald Trump is coming out and speaking out against the election, and he's being prosecuted for it. So here's why that's bullshit.
Yeah, that might be a relevant point, Nathan, if you just read like the first paragraph of the indictment, or not the first paragraph, but the first, one of the first important paragraphs, which is, quote, despite having lost, the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following the election day on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew they were false. So if you're just reading that and you're on Fox News, not doing your job, and just reading that piece, you might think, wow, I cannot believe that in America, the United States of Star-Spangled Awesome America, we are prosecuting someone for political protected speech. But as Nathan alluded, that's fucking bullshit. And you know that if you read just, to page 2 of the indictment, which
literally on page 2
is pretty easy reading, honestly. Like, this is paragraph 3. Quote, The defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. He was also entitled to formally challenge the election results through lawful and appropriate means, such as by seeking recounts or audits of the popular vote in states or by filing lawsuits challenging ballots and procedures. Indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods of contesting the election results. His efforts to change the outcome in any state through recounts, audits, or legal challenges were uniformly unsuccessful. Yes, that's the indictment. That's the prosecutor in this case saying, agreeing with Nathan and agreeing with like Republicans and Trump that you're right. You have a right to talk even falsely about like political things like this.
Well,
so you might wonder,
fuck.
Yeah, you might wonder why.
There goes the entire defensive strategy for right-wing commentators if they had any regard for the truth and had any level of integrity.
Yes, because it is just not about free speech at all. And if you listen to Trump, if you listen to right-wing commentators, they're trying to make this whole issue about persecution. Not prosecution, persecution of Trump as a political actor.
Yeah.
But it's pretty easy to dispel those claims, and I want to just quickly get through them. Because, like, yes, like Jack Smith acknowledges it in the indictment, and that would be pretty fucking dumb if you were, you know, the prosecutor and you specifically say, yeah, the defendant had the right to do all the things that the defendant did and that I'm charging him for. But the thing is, he's not being charged for his speech, at least not any protected political speech.
His speech is being used as evidence, but it's not what he's being charged with.
Exactly. That's like, I think that's so important. So there are all kinds of speech that can be a component to a crime. And we accept those very reasonably. And we don't really think of them as limitations on free speech, but crimes that can involve speech, which may seem like a little distinction.
So let me put it this way. If I very publicly said, I hate Michael and I'm going to murder him, and then 2 weeks later, Michael turns out dead, most likely, if I were to be arrested for that, the prosecutors would use me saying, I hate Michael and I want him dead in that trial as proof.
As evidence, yes.
As evidence that I was the perpetrator.
Exactly. And what it would be evidence for is a motive or an intention to do something. And so
exactly.
I think that's like a really great and clear example. And it's an example that shows up in all kinds of crimes that involve speech. So basically the important combination is like speech as evidence, spoken at certain times and in certain contexts that when paired with a particular state of mind for which the speech is evidence, become criminal. Like perjury, for example, or fraud or conspiracy. Like it's not illegal to lie, but you can't lie to Congress or to officials or in a court of law.
If
that's
you are under
perjury.
Oath.
If you're under oath, exactly. And you can't lie on legal documents. That's fraud, right? And it's not illegal to say, to Nathan's point, we should rob a bank. But if you get together with your buddies and agree to rob a bank and start plotting, that's a conspiracy to rob a bank. In which case, the speech is a component. It can be a component of the crime. And it's not criminalizing the speech. It's the speech as evidence for the crime taking place, and often as evidence for intention to take an action, right? Intention to do a crime. Or, so like the idea that like Trump is being prosecuted or persecuted for his political speech is insane as soon as you start reading any of the things that he's actually being prosecuted for.
Like an undergraduate reading, and I define an undergraduate reading as reading like maybe the first page or the second page and then skimming a few words here and there of the rest of the document. An undergraduate reading of this document shows you that that's wrong. Like
Yeah.
shows you that it has nothing to do with that. And again, the reason why we're harping on this so much is because this is the entire defensive strategy of Trump in the court of public opinion and right-wing commentators on Fox News, on One American News Network, on the Daily Wire that they're using to actively try to defend Trump.
Yeah.
And it is one of those things that is so easily disprovable that you have to question the motives of the people that are spreading it. Obviously, you can question the motives of Trump, but you also have to acknowledge the fact that if people are leaving out that vital piece of information when they talk about this case, even if they are, when they are speaking in favor of Trump, those are people that you can't trust because they are actively trying to lie to you. And I want to be clear about this. The reason why Trump is doing this, the reason why Trump is using this line of attack is because he knows that there is a large group of people in the United States that are going to just accept it at face value without a simple Google search.
Yeah.
Because what he's trying to do is not tell you the truth, not try to argue against the actual indictment, argue against the actual charges piece by piece, break them down and say, here's why I'm innocent. What he's trying to do is he's trying to win the court of public opinion so that he wins the presidency and he can pardon himself.
Yes.
That's the strategy.
Yeah.
Because he believes at this point that the only way he's going to stay out of jail, and he's probably right about this, is by becoming president and either using the, forcing the Justice Department to shut down the investigations, or by pardoning himself, or some combination of the two. And the reason why right-wing commentators are going along with it is either because they also unapologetically want Trump to win because, they're sycophantic towards him, or because his base has such a lock on like all of right-wing politics that if they speak out against Trump, they're afraid that they're going to lose their career or lose their audience.
Yeah.
That's why they're doing it, and that's why Trump's doing it.
Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to talk about this. As much as we loathe to like dive into yet another Trump crime, and as much as we've already talked about, we talked about the January 6th committee and investigation in Congress. Like, we've talked about these issues a lot. But it's critically important that we shut down some of these disingenuous arguments, and that you, listener, when people tell you these arguments, shut them down as well, because it's really important that he not become president again, and he will, and his base will stick with him, almost certainly, and it's going to be all on the people in the middle to decide the election. And if he can credibly make an argument to those people that this is corruption, or that this is not fair, or that, he is not a criminal, and therefore they get him elected, then like things are going to get way worse. Not only will he pardon himself, like there's almost no way that like the right-wing political organization doesn't further corrupt our democracy and potentially really destroy like fundamental bedrock principles of enfranchisement.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
With
should
all
probably
that
talk
being
about
said,
the counts.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah, with all of that being said, let's go ahead and actually lay out what is being alleged here and what he's being accused of.
Yep. One thing to call out about these is that multiple of these charges have already been brought successfully against actors and organizers of the January 6th insurrection and people in like the network around like organizers and people like contributing to that. So it's not like this is like crazy out of left field and that there's no way these charges could stick. We've already seen them apply to people depending on their different roles in the insurrection. So count one, conspiracy to defraud the United States. This applies to Trump's repeated and widespread efforts to spread false claims about the 2020 election, knowing that they weren't true, and allegedly attempting to illegally like discount or delegitimize votes in an effort to overturn that election. So this covers things like the fraudulent electors scheme, which is where they organized slates of alternate electors who were planning to claim that they were legitimate electors, perjure themselves in the process, and submit those ballots to Congress fraudulently. And so to conspire to organize these people and take steps to encourage them and facilitate their crime, which would be defrauding the United States of the legal documents attesting to their status as electors and the slate of electors elected according to their state laws, is a pretty fucking clear crime. And part of the evidence of this conspiracy is all of the organization that went into organizing all those people, all of the, facilitation of, big lie claims that serve to convince people and even trick people and lie to potential false electors about the status of, the legal cases involved in getting them to submit false slates of electors.
Yeah. On top of that, there was also an instance where Trump had pressured officials in the Justice Department to send letters to various different states, mainly the swing states that decided the election, falsely claiming that the U.S. Justice Department had a reason to believe that there were irregularities in the 2020 election, and basically using that as a justification for trying to push those fake electors.
Exactly. Yeah.
And again, that is making a false claim in your official capacity as the chief executive that one of your agencies has found evidence of irregularities and using that authority to push for states to help you overthrow the election.
Yeah.
That is a crime.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't try to trick states or convince states to take illegal action. You're not allowed to do that. That's attempting to defraud or to obstruct official proceeding or defraud the United States. It defraud in the case of actually lying to those states.
Yeah. On top of that, also included in the indictment is Trump's attempts to pressure Mike Pence into not certifying the election on January 6th. And on top of that, this is something that I think is actually new information because I don't think this had ever previously come out. The night of January 6th, or hours after the January 6th riots, he called legislators in the House of Representatives to pressure them into rejecting the election and trying to cite the violence on January 6th as basically a random excuse. Yeah. So again, he is interfering. He is using his power as the the power of the presidency to interfere with an official election proceeding.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's a crime.
Exactly. It's so obviously a crime when you put it that way. And it's the Electoral Count Act says when the certification has to take place. It lays out how it has to take place. And so attempting to obstruct or actually obstructing the lawful administration of a proceeding that has to occur, it legally must occur, is clearly an attempt to or actual obstruction of an official proceeding. And when you organize all your cronies to try to do the same thing, that's conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Those are two of the counts in this indictment. And they're so clearly laid out and true, not just according to the indictment itself, but according to everything that we already fucking know about Trump's behavior leading up to the January 6th insurrection. That's the crazy thing about this. No one is contesting that these things didn't happen. Trump is not saying no, I didn't try to, pressure the Congress or the Justice Department or Mike Pence to overturn the election. What he's claiming is, I thought that I could do that. That's his best legal defense. The problem is, as is clearly laid out in the indictment, he didn't.
Yeah. And on top of that, he knew he didn't.
Yes, exactly.
That's the other kicker, cuz like he is still going out there claiming that the election was stolen.
Yeah.
He's still, which by the way is just further evidence that the prosecution can use in terms of the entire conspiracy. But like one of the points that they make it a point to say is that Donald Trump knew that it wasn't stolen.
Yeah.
And the evidence that they lay out is that there were various people with direct knowledge of the claims whose jobs it was to actually investigate the claims, to look at the claims, and to advise the president, who all said, hey, bro, this is bullshit. So it lays out the vice president, senior leaders of the Justice Department, the director of national intelligence, the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, senior White House attorneys, senior staffers on the defendant's reelection campaign, state legislators and officials, state and federal courts, the ones that he took his cases to, in almost every single case, rejected it. So you had all of these people who were either a part of the investigation or a part of determining a part of determining whether or not the fraud actually happened, who all were telling him this did not happen. There was no widespread voter fraud. The election was not fraudulent. And yet he still, knowing that was false, tried to overturn the election.
Yeah, exactly. So some people who are dedicated to Trump might try to make the argument, yeah, they all told him this, but, maybe he didn't believe them. Or maybe there were also some people whispering in his ear that this actually was legal. So there were some people floating legal theories trying to make the claim that some of this was legal. Uniformly, these were clearly rejected by people in positions of authority, lawyers, the Justice Department, all these people saying no, these are in fact not legal. But maybe, these people might claim that Trump is not really smart enough to be able to parse through those things and was going to rely on the very stretched legal theories of the people most dedicated to trying to keep him in office. Now, best case scenario, that's an argument that Trump's pretty much a dumbass. So I don't know why that supports him being president, but maybe it supports him not being a criminal.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that there are pieces of evidence in the indictment that indicate Trump's specific kind of state of mind relative to his knowledge about this. There were some cases where he actually referred to the fact that that Biden had won. On January 3rd, he was given a briefing by I think it was the Department of Defense about a foreign policy issue, and he was like, that's Biden's problem. I'm out. That's not a direct quote, but it clearly indicates that he is aware that he is no longer going to be president. In addition, on January 1st, he's attempting to, again, yell at Pence into going along with not certifying the election, something that Pence has repeatedly refused to do and said that he clearly does not have the right to do. Again, reminding the president that that is not something that he has the power legally to do. And Trump says to Pence, quote, "You're too honest." And then proceeds to tweet out about how people have to come out to the rally on January 6th and all that stuff. Nathan, when someone is telling you the truth that you think is true and that you agree with, do you usually tell them that they're too honest?
Not generally, no.
Not generally. Generally, you'd only tell someone if they were too honest if their honesty was getting in your way, the way of your dishonesty, for example.
Yeah, exactly. That's so. It's definitely a knowing conspiracy. Now, at this point, I don't know if he's so much of a pathological liar that he actually does believe this now. Yeah. But clearly, at the time, he didn't.
Yeah.
He might be truly deranged to the point where he has convinced himself that he actually won, but he did not think that at the time. And the indictment clearly shows that. And what I think is really interesting about this indictment is I remember us covering all of this stuff as it was happening. And I remember like in almost every instance just being like, how the fuck is this not a crime? Like I remember like specifically saying like when he did the phone call with Georgia and said like, find me 11,000 votes. I was like, if that's not illegal, it really should be. And what's interesting about this indictment is like he lays out key parts that we all kind of watched happen in real time, and we all were kind of like, how is that okay? Like how is this not breaking the law? And he says, well, actually it is breaking the law because you're interfering with an official proceeding. And it's like, oh, so I'm not fucking crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that the law moves really fucking slowly.
And I think that's another part that Trump has been using as part of his defense. Basically, it's been 2.5 years since since he left the White House. Why did it take this long for the indictment to come out? Part of that goes along with the idea that he is claiming, I should say, that this is just about election interference for the 2024 election. And the reason why they waited so long to do this indictment is so that the trials and the potential prosecutions and the potential sentencing would happen around the time as the election, around the same time as the election. So what's kind of interesting is that Smith actually kind of, I think he kind of like indirectly addresses that, because right now the prosecution is asking for a speedy trial on this. They want this trial to go to set off this January, or this coming January, which in terms of major court cases, that's pretty soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Other court cases, other indictments that we've talked about in the past are subsequently going to happen in March and in May. But they're hoping to do this in January. And part of it is because Jack Smith is basically making the argument that because this is such an egregious issue that is regarding the integrity of American democratic elections and the very bedrock of democracy, this is something that needs to happen as soon as possible. Now, it doesn't seem like he's directly acknowledging the fact that this is something that people should, the outcome of this court case is something that people should know for the election. But I'm going to go ahead and say it. The outcome of this court case is something that people should know before the election goes off, because we're talking about somebody who is being charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to overturn a democratic election.
Yeah.
Seems like somebody who is running in a democratic election, we should know where they stand on that. We should know
whether
where
any
the evidence
rejections are legitimate. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it makes absolute sense for this to go off right now. And yeah, to some extent that might be a political question, but I mean, we're talking about the future of democracy here. We're talking about the legitimacy of democracy here. Yeah. We're talking about somebody that does not believe in democracy, does not care about democracy, allegedly. And that needs to be in people's minds when they're voting, because it might be the last time you vote.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, a couple other things we definitely have to touch on just pretty fast. So we've already touched on 3 of the 4 counts, right? Conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, and the obstruction of or attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And the last one, which we haven't touched on, is conspiracy against rights, which refers to Trump and his co-conspirators' alleged attempts to oppress, threaten, and intimidate people, and deprive them of their right to vote and or to have those votes counted. So this is essentially like voting protection law from the Reconstruction era, essentially, that is designed to make sure that people are not disenfranchised either by overt threats or intimidation or by their votes being counted differently from other people's votes.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the outcome that would have occurred and was attempted, right? The conspiracy is the organization of people to attempt something illegal, right? Conspiracy against rights. We're seeing the connections here. So the conspiracy to basically disenfranchise people who voted for Biden in states where Biden won and change the outcome of their votes to be something else. So basically deprive them of their right to have their vote counted equally.
Yeah. Basically, if the fake elector scheme had actually come to fruition, then that means that, like, say in Wisconsin, that means that the voters in Wisconsin are disenfranchised.
Mm-hmm.
That means that effectively the decision they made is just thrown out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
exactly.
not okay.
Yeah, exactly. So another thing that kind of came out as a part of this was a serious attempt by the Trump group of conspirators to put in place Jeffrey Clark as the U.S. Attorney General and the head of the DOJ because Jeffrey Clark was friendly to the efforts to overturn the election. And this was Jeffrey Clark is like an environmental lawyer. He had no business and no qualifications to be the U.S. Attorney General, but his friendliness to Trump's efforts are what qualified him. And this included signaling by Clark that they were potentially like prepared to use the U.S. military to put down protests against the subversion of the election. So basically, quoting from the indictment, the deputy White House counsel reiterated to co-conspirator 4 that there had not been outcome determinative fraud in the election, and that if the defendant remained in office nonetheless, there would be, quote, riots in every major city in the U.S. And Clark, who's assumed to be co-conspirator 4, responded, well, Deputy White House counsel, that's why there's an Insurrection Act. And the Insurrection Act authorized the president to deploy the U.S. military and National Guard forces within the United States in response to civil disorder or rebellion. So this was them saying, we have a plan to use the U.S. military to make sure that when we subvert this election, no one can protest it.
Yeah. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
He is actively saying, he is in no uncertain terms, we are going to steal this election, and if people don't like it, we are going to send the fucking military after them.
Yeah.
These are fascists. All right? That is not an overstatement. That is not like that's not an exaggeration. Stealing an election and putting down people who protest it.
Mm-hmm.
Fucking fascism.
Yeah. Yes. And there's so much more we could say about this indictment. Everybody should read it. This is a historic indictment, and it's only 45 pages long, double spaced. That's like not very long. You can read it. Like everybody should read this indictment. But one of the things I want to emphasize as we like close out is that, again, people are not, and Trump is not really contesting that the things in this indictment that are alleged here didn't happen. There's plenty of evidence from the Jan 6 Commission and the investigation there, from Jack Smith and his investigation, and a grand jury has found that there's enough evidence that these things happened to bring an indictment. There's plenty of evidence that this occurred. So regardless of whether a jury ultimately finds that this escalated to a level of a crime and is worthy of imprisonment, these facts, as alleged, which are again not disputed by pretty much anybody, should disqualify someone from being the president of the United States. Perhaps not legally. There's no law that would prevent him from being the president of the United States then, but certainly on principle. These are things that are antithetical to the very existence of an elected president in a democratic republic. You shouldn't be able to rule and be the head, the legitimate leader of a free nation if you actively work against that nation and its ongoing survival.
At this point, Trump being president in a democracy would be like a vegan being a butcher.